This computer. Okay, so I want to, of course, thank everybody for being here. It's been we've had, this is our last month of the year, and we have a new logo going forward on the website with the next group of people, and we have a bunch of good people lined up for next year. It's going to be very exciting. This lecture has been one of the ones that a lot of people have written me about and said they're very excited about, and we do have a lot of people who watch the YouTube videos and download the videos and watch them. And actually, Maureen and I have both had people tell us that they really appreciate the video series. They've gotten a lot out of it. So, thanks for showing up on Thanksgiving. Hopefully you didn't have a bunch of people over that are in the other room saying, what is she doing? Why is she there? All right, well, anyway, as I have done for everyone else, and I'll probably continue to do, I'll let the speaker introduce themselves, but this is Nika Logan, and we met a few years ago and worked together on a paper, and she does excellent work, and so I think you're going to get a lot out of this talk, and I'm going to let her take over and run things from there, and give any kind of introduction she wants to give. If you don't know who she is, you should look her up and find out, and this is she can tell you how she wants to run things for questions and stuff. Just a reminder, if you're on mute, you can hit the space bar, temporarily unmute yourself so you can talk. I sometimes find that the easiest way rather than looking for the button. And if we have our video on, of course, you could just raise your hand and ask a question, stuff like that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Nika, if you want to take over.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Nneka Logan. I'm associate professor in the newly formed School of Communication at Virginia Tech. Yes. My focus is public relations, race, rhetorical studies, organizational communication. And before I got into academia, I spent about 10 years in various corporate communications roles. And so everything that I do is somehow connected to real world experiences. Not that scholarship isn't that, but I try to bridge those gaps. And I look forward to having an informal conversation tonight, and I'll just confess to one other thing. So I've had a very exciting day. I've cooked a full Thanksgiving dinner. So if there's a period or a comma missing or something on one of my slides, just please be forgiving. So I'm on like the third shift right now, but I'm so delighted to be with everyone. And so I see some very familiar faces. And oh, by the way, thank you all for being here. And thank you so much, Michael, for inviting me. Dr. Kent, it's just a pleasure. Wouldn't have missed it for the world. And I'm thankful to be spending this Thanksgiving with you guys. I didn't know, like I do see some, of course, familiar faces, but others of you I don't know. Is it okay if you just we go around for some introductions before I get started?
Sure, I have the video, all the pictures up. I'm not sure if you do, but I think Shima's on the top right. Maureen's on the top left. Maureen, we'll let you go and set the standard, and then Shima can go after you, and then we'll move down to Alvin.
Hi, I'm Maureen Taylor. I teach at the University of Technology, Sydney, and I am the editor of Public Relations Review. And this is actually the high point of my month. Is to listen to these presentations and to learn new things. And I also make all of my PhD students listen to them as well. And one of my students actually wrote in her end of year, first year PhD evaluation, the high point of her year was the Sydney lecture series. So even when she can't make it like today, because she doesn't have any childcare, she still listens to them and she uses them. And she actually quotes them back to me while we're talking about research ideas. So this is a really good forum for junior scholars, doctoral students, and associate and full professors.
Okay.
Hi, Maureen. So nice to see you.
Shima, you want to go ahead and go next? You're muted.
If you wish, I can. My name is Konik. I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm associate professor of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. It's the oldest university in Ukraine, more than 400 years. And as you mentioned that you came from the practical field, I worked for United Nations and World Bank for several years and was in the commercial public relations, and just go to academia and have no clue what to do inside the university, because we didn't have a good connections with scholars from other countries, and now we are trying to find out, because we established the Department of Public Relations by practitioners. We didn't have the school. That's a serious. And so now I'm traveling around the world. Not now. Now we have a quarantine, but before, travel to Finland, to Poland, trying to find some contacts. And I read about this group in Facebook, and was interested. And this is my second lecture which I'm hearing. So thanks to organizer and to all other colleagues.
Excellent. Shima, you want to go next? You got it figured out?
Sure. Do you have my voice?
Yep. I can hear you.
Good. I'm Shima. I'm a PhD student at University of New South Wales. Professor Michael Kent is my supervisor, and my thesis and my research is about how voluntary activist groups frame their issues in order to build relationships with other groups and build social capital.
Okay, thank you. Alvin?
Oh, hi, I'm Alvin, a PhD student now, like candidate now at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And I do public relations, but more so on the theoretical sides compared to people who have been a lot of practical experiences. I only did like 1 year PR as a practitioner, as an intern, and several years as a journalist, but mostly came from the network sides and also the political communication side. Yeah, thank you.
Good. Anna?
Hi everyone, my name is Anna. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Tennessee, and I'm studying community engagement particularly, but I'm interested in engagement in general. And I also have practical experience from different sides, and always also try to connect my theory building with the practice. So it's very exciting to hear from a person who is also doing something like this. Right, thank you.
Wade?
Yeah, can you hear me? Right. So I was my postgraduate student at University of New South Wales, and my major was journalism and communication. And during study, I completed a thesis on public relations, and mostly about the opinion leaders and the relation with the micro-blogging platforms. And yeah, I'm just not feeling really well this morning, so just do a brief. Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. And then Yoshi? Still muted. There you go.
Hi everyone, my name is Bhupesh. I am doing my PhD at University of New South Wales, Sydney. Before starting my PhD, I was a public relations professional in India. I used to work for several NGOs. And in my PhD, I am exploring synergies between communication for development and public relations. Thank you.
Okay, Mitchell, you get to go last.
Hi, so my name is Mitchell. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Sydney. I'm a PhD in sociology that I completed about 10 years ago now. After I did that, I ended up working in PR, which is how I've come to this space. I worked in political PR for Australia's first female Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, and I was a junior media advisor. But that's because I got hired there really not because of my PR background, but because I wrote a thesis on Rupert Murdoch and media bias and these type of topics. So I consider myself an early career academic when it comes to PR and PR theory, which is why I'm, enjoying this lecture series so much. So yeah, thanks for having me again.
Okay. All right, it's all yours.
Okay, wonderful to meet you all.
Well, I'm going to share my screen and we'll walk through the topics for today. But please, as we move forward, ask questions in the middle. Just unmute yourselves and talk. There's few of us. There's enough of us here for us to like really engage in a discussion. That's the point I'm trying to make. So if you don't want to use the chat, don't worry about it. Just go ahead, interrupt at any time, and hopefully we'll have a good time. All right. And we'll have I think the more of us that participate, the better the time is. That's what I say to my students. But oops, I'm starting my presentation without sharing my screen. How about that? All right. All right, so we're going to talk about public relations, post-colonialism, globalization, and race. And I'll just pretty much march right through in that order. And I just want to begin with a basic kind of orientation question. And everyone has a different response to this question, and I always find them interesting when I get them. But forgive me if it's a bit pedestrian, but just take a minute, or maybe not a literal minute, but like 30 seconds, and just tell me, from your perspective, what is public relations? What does it do in the world? What's the work that we perform either as professionals or as scholars? What is public relations? Softball, way to get us started. No right or wrong answer.
It's the building of mutual understanding between an organization and its strategic publics.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly that. Other thoughts? Absolutely.
Establish cooperation between organization and its public.
Absolutely. Very difficult to build mutually beneficial relationships without any cooperation. Absolutely. One more. How else do we conceptualize?
There are like communicative strategies that will influence the relationships in the society. For example, between organizations and their publics, and also between different organizational publics, just all kinds of relationships.
Absolutely. All of these answers are correct. There are literally probably hundreds of definitions of public relations, but each and everything you guys said is all found in the scholarly literature, whether we go back to the classic definition from Cutlip, Center, and Broom. Public relations is the management function that establishes and maintains the mutually beneficial relationships between an organization and the publics on who its success and failure depends. Or we can take a look at the more recent PRSA definition, which is very similar to that original one from Cutlip, Center, and Broom. Public relations is a strategic communication function or process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics, right? Those are very similar. But then when we move over to the other side of the grid a bit, the definitions change. So we see this one here that you might have read in the Dutta reading. Public relations, broadly understood as the strategic development of meanings to shape public opinion and relationships through persuasion, circulates knowledge claims as universal values that work toward maintaining global inequities along the lines of race, nation, gender, and imperialism. That's a very different definition than the first two we began with, right? Not too many mutually beneficial relationships being built in that conceptualization. More so here we see public relations as a strategic tool to maintain dominance, hegemony over marginalized groups. And then as we move into the lower right quadrant, we see yet another definition. The primary goal of public relations as a professionalized occupation, if not a profession, is to serve the community and society at large. PR should be a practice that leads to the public good. So when we hold all these definitions together, and literally if we had all the definitions in the world, I think they could fall into, broadly speaking, three kinds of buckets: critical, functionalist or instrumental, and social good. And you saw some examples there. So there'll be a quiz on this later. No, just kidding. Which one would you put in critical? Which one would you put in the critical
Neo-Marxist post-colonial perspective.
That is.
Yeah, without question, right? Functionalist or instrumental?
The mutually beneficial relationships.
Absolutely, because even though we're mutually beneficial relationships is at the center of that definition, beneath that language is mutually beneficial relationships that do achieve organizational objectives, right? What is the saying? What gets measured matters, right? So what's the objective we're trying to achieve? And then there was the one there about social good, which is one of my favorites. That's kind of where I line up on the public relations continuum. I like to think about how we can do what we do to serve the social good in some way, but through the work of corporations and organizations. And that's where my professional kind of experience influences my take on public relations. So now that we have like a basic understanding, which you came obviously to the meeting tonight with, but of public relations, let's kind of move forward into the territory of colonialism. So can you tell me what you know or what you understand of colonialism? And right now, no right or wrong answers, right? We're just talking about what we know. So you can use the images as kind of clues and prompts. I love this one down here, futuristic, but I had a field day looking for images yesterday. But anyway, can you tell me what you know of colonialism? And I think, and I'm starting there as a way to walk us into post-colonialism. But
a process where one group of people colonize the other group.
Absolutely. We have one group that enters into the space of another, and then what happens?
When one nation is taking all the good from another nation and actually use its resources, land, people.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have one group entering into the space of another, and when they enter that space, they are taking the resources, whether it's land, whether it's people, other valuable materials. What else goes into colonialism? Anything else? And if not, don't worry, I'll tell you the answer. It's on the next.
Placement, cultural erasure.
Yes.
Ideological hegemony, the colonization of the mind through religion. I guess there's a few others. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The dominated nation trying to erase the ethnicity of people, erase the language, for example.
Absolutely.
Like in our case, Russia colonized Ukraine and other countries and trying to erase the language, the ethnicity,
Absolutely, because when colonizers are successful enough with these processes of erasure, the people no longer remember what once was, which makes the perpetuation of hegemony much, much easier. These are all fantastic responses to the question, what is colonialism? You guys nailed it on the head, right? And I'll just offer this definition as well. We can understand colonization as a process which involves a dominant group imposing its culture, political system, and beliefs on a subordinated group. Involving conquest and domination, it has occurred throughout human history with the purpose of gaining power through the accumulation of resources, including land, trade, wealth, and military dominance. And of course, the UK, Britain was a primary example of colonialism and colonization. There in Australia, in America, and in England as well. So in order to really grasp,
Thanksgiving.
oh, I'm sorry.
And it's Thanksgiving.
and it's Thanksgiving. And I just got done cooking a turkey and dressing. So what does that say about colonization? And I'm not ashamed to say, I don't feel bad. That turkey was not dry. It was good. I wish I could have shared it with you all. But yes, and it's Thanksgiving. And I probably shouldn't make light, but sometimes you have to make light. But moving on, but with this understanding of colonialism, it provides a pathway for us to understand the ways in which post-colonialism occurs today. So if colonialism is structured into, so let me say that differently. Colonialism thus is structured into new relations of material flow that simultaneously reproduce the structures of US imperialism, reconfigured under the logic of neoliberal governance that privileges the ideology of the free market as the overarching framework for political and social and economic relations. That is a mouthful. How do you contextualize that? How do you take what we just discussed about colonialism, particularly in its original iterations, to what Dutta is saying about post-colonialism now?
I'd located in organisations such as the World Bank and the IMF, but also as an Australian, the dominance of US media goods, primarily Hollywood and television, as the Trojan horse of ideological values.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you touched on where I was going to go with my next question, so we can stay there with it. But how do organizations like the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO contribute to these processes of post-colonialism? What do they do?
They fund projects that develop traditionally underdeveloped areas. They fund things like roads and dams that take little into account of the people whose lives will be touched. And then when countries overborrow and cannot pay back, they essentially help ruin those countries' economies because they create all sorts of ways to pay back the debt, and they structure it. And many developing countries are crippled by bad governance that took out too many loans to work on too many infrastructure projects that had too little return for actually the people that they were supposed to benefit.
Absolutely. So then they're caught up, these organizations, not in and of themselves reproduce the negative effects of post-colonialism, but they're implicated and imbricated within structures and systems that all work together to, that all work together in a sense to make development even more challenging despite the goals of development. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Oh, okay. It looked like, okay.
Yeah, I had a question at this point, but because I'd accept that narrative up until 4 years ago, but I think Donald Trump has totally disrupted that. And in Australia, of course, too, we've gone back to Keynesian economics. Neoliberalism has been put in the dustbin of history, at least while we deal with the pandemic, and Trump reintroducing trade barriers and going against some of those core policies promoted by. So I'm just sort of wondering, and I guess China have their own sort of version of their World Bank, that they set up themselves. So I wonder, to what extent do you think this current moment in history might be challenging this notion that it's the globalization of neoliberalism?
That is an excellent question. So I'll answer it or discuss it and like to open it up as well for broader discussion, but I'll come at it in two different ways. So first, I think that the Trump effect is yet to be known. It is too early to tell on that one. We see damage that has been done, but I don't think we see the full extent. And other people are free to disagree with me and obviously would say he did some good things, and history will judge that. I don't think I'm not in a position to speculate on Trump's impact on globalization, despite his isolationist policies right now. However, I would say then to the second point of your question, I don't think neoliberalism and neoliberal capitalism has I think proclamations of its death may be premature. I think that we are still, I think the durability of neoliberalism is greater than the isolationist politics of Donald Trump and his supporters. Now, is that a good thing or not? I don't know. We'll have to figure it out. But we are in the other thing I would add is that we're in an unprecedented historical moment, and we're at a point where I think it is, I've never felt more uncertain in my life than I do right now about what is happening economically. So I think it's interesting. This reading was reading Dutta's readings 4 years ago, right? World is an entire different place. The readings probably from 2016 to 2000 are far more similar, have far more in common than anything that's written 2020 and beyond. So my personal thought is that the processes and products of neoliberalism are with us, are with us and remain undiminished despite opposition. But other thoughts, that's just my little thought.
I think neoliberalism is also impacting social development negatively in developing countries. We are seeing a new trend. It's called corporatization of development. So, today we are not giving importance to local culture and, innovations at the community level, but we are coming up with new systems and new corporate methodologies to address serious issues like poverty and development. So I don't know how good a strategy that is.
I can't see. I'm torn. I'm torn because on the one hand, I think any time that the social good is in the hands of corporations, and in neoliberal entities as a whole, we're in a dangerous place. But on the other hand, corporations are run by people and human beings with a heart and with ideas, and who can leverage. I believe it's possible, and I'll talk more about this when I talk about race. I'm not yet convinced that it's impossible for corporate power to be leveraged for social good. So it's an interesting debate that we can have, but without question, corporations have been at the heart of some of society's most challenging social problems. So we need to keep thinking about this, and I kind of we need to keep thinking about it and talking about it. But one real quick question: does the word neoliberalism, almost like post-colonialism, or all these things get batted around? Is everybody comfortable with their knowledge of neoliberalism and what it is? Do we want to offer a few words about how we conceptualize that term?
Please do.
Mitchell.
Okay.
Mitchell probably has a pretty good sense of that. I've read some of his work and your work as well, Nika.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to go there. So it's a market logic that dates to Adam Smith, the hidden hand of the market. It was re-energized in the mid-20th century by the Chicago School and Milton Friedman and other economists, I should say. And it's dominant in the West since the 1980s. In Britain, it was imposed by Thatcher. In America, it's called Reaganism, and that's where it was installed there. Australia actually had Labor prime ministers at the time, and so we introduced what you might call a third way approach, which is a soft form of neoliberalism that's sort of still got lots of social justice embedded in it, like welfare state and that type of stuff. But generally, it's the quantification of everything according to an economic logic. So we used to call it economic rationalism in Australia.
And I think the best way to actually think about neoliberalism is just to think about the rationales behind COVID-19 responses. when you use an economic frame to make sense of a pandemic crisis, and that the kids have to go to school, and that people have to go to work, and that lockdowns aren't possible, and that wearing masks is bad for business, I think, if anything, COVID-19 puts a real light on how neoliberalism economics becomes the dominant frame instead of public health and public safety. Because if we were in a different period of thinking of the social contract between human beings, we wouldn't be saying it's the economy, right? We have to keep the economy going. Screw the economy for 6 months, right? Stay home. Let the virus starve, and then let's all go back to doing what we do. So that's when I think of neoliberalism, I just think of every Western country's response to COVID-19. I'm done.
No, absolutely. Very well said, right? It's this kind of hyper-economic rationality that suggests that private enterprise, lack of regulation, let business rule will solve all the social problems that we have. And right now we're seeing how well that works, as you so well explained. It's this idea, right, that if we let corporations and businesses and the free market lead the way, everything else will fall into place and the social good will be just fine. And we're seeing that is absolutely not the case. So we kind of touched on, go back. So we kind of answered this question, the question I began with already, like how do organizations like the IMF, World Bank, and WTO contribute to globalization? And we can see how Dutta has characterized it right there. And much of what he says resonated in your responses and answering that question, and then delving into our discussion of neoliberalism. But what ultimately we see all of these things, what we see that all of these things have in common is a commitment to neoclassic economic rationality, privileged above all else, and trickling down, exercising itself through other aspects in society. So for me, the way, when I put all this together and I conceptualize post-colonialism, I think about it like this: new, old, different, and ever-evolving ways to produce and reproduce the dynamics that facilitate the colonization and marginalization of oppressed groups, right? That's the way post-colonialism is traditionally understood. However, less understood, and I think even more indicative of the discussion that we kind of just had and where it might be if we carried it all the way out, I think post-colonialism also includes efforts to transform not yet marginalized or oppressed groups into marginalized or oppressed people via processes of colonization, whether it's resources, ideas, religion, etc. Old school ways, war; new school ways, digital technology. COVID-19 under neoliberal global governance is a perfect example in my mind of how post-colonialism is existing in a framework outside of maybe race. Does that make sense? Because people previously not marginalized, not oppressed, are finding themselves increasingly marginalized, oppressed, isolated, economically victimized by the ways in which the hegemonic ideology of neoliberalism that governs Western political economies operates. And for those of you interested in learning more about post-colonialism, there's some foundational text up there. Edward Said's Orientalism. And many times we've all heard this idea of the other, right? The other is less than, the other is not us. Well, that concept is credited to Said. Do you guys, is everybody familiar with the concept of the other and its role in post-colonial theory? Or is that something we can talk about? Because I think the other, the other has undergone change. I'm thinking of all the different things I've heard you say. When Said was writing, the other would be the non-white person within, as represented through the white mind. That was the other he was talking about. It described Western representations of cultures in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and explained why they were depicted as they were stereotypically, because it was coming from a stereotypical mind frame, or mind state. It was coming out as stereotypical. However, I think kind of back to what, I hate when you present it like I can't see your names now, but I think it's Mitchell. Is it Mitchell? Okay, back to what you said and in our discussion about Donald Trump, who knows, right? I think the other has changed. The other has changed right here in the United States based on, in my mind, Trumpism. I think the other is changing around the world with the rise of China. So all of these concepts that have been stable for so long are now entering a point of destabilization. And again, any point in which you have a question, just stop and we can, kind of go off track and have a discussion. But another foundational text I would encourage anybody to look at if they're interested in post-colonialism is Gayatri Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? And here she is talking about, she's talking about a group of people, the subaltern, that are those people that are so oppressed, they don't even have the voice of the oppressed, right? And she's coming at it through the lens of feminism and saying that the conditions of oppressed women are such that they don't even have the voice of the oppressed. So then what do? What does that even mean from a public relations standpoint? And then finally, I'd encourage you guys to take a look at, if you're interested, Homi Bhabha's Location of Culture. And he, and his introduction or his place in post-colonial theory is particularly important because he was one of the first to theorize beyond the binary of oppressed and oppressor, colonized and colonizer, and say it's far more complicated than that. There's things like hybridity, where there's a blending of culture from the colonized and the colonizer, or mimicry, a form of resistance that colonized people might engage in to empower themselves against the colonizer. So all of these various approaches to post-colonialism help us to understand relations of domination in different ways and can then be utilized to further explore public relations. And we'll get there in a moment, I promise. All right, so post-colonialism, we can kind of sum up a bit and say, conceived and developed in literary and cultural studies, post-colonial theory has challenged the Eurocentric assumptions of the world and has opened up new ways of looking at politics, economy, and society through the eyes of people historically marginalized by dominant discourses. Critical management studies scholars have gone on to deploy post-colonial theory powerfully to show how Western knowledge has shaped the overlapping colonial, neo-colonial, also can be understood as post-colonial, project of control and domination in organizational settings. And that comes to us from public relations scholars and OrgComm scholars as well. All right, with some level of post-colonialism foundational understanding, let's move along and talk about the video that I hope y'all got a chance to see. So did you guys get a chance to see this video? Edward Bernays, CIA, Guatemala, what happened here? So by a show of hands, and I don't know if I can see everybody on the same screen, how many people had a chance to, okay, one. Can I show it real quick? Do I have time, or is that allowable?
Sure.
Michael? Okay, so bear with me. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and then I'm gonna pull it up because I wasn't sure if everyone had seen it. All right, it's kind of long, but.
Play it because it's available online publicly, so I think you should be fine.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop my share and then I'm gonna find it.
I think I got it open.
You have it open?
I think so.
If not, I think I do too.
You got it, or I can bring it up.
Okay.
You want me
We'll
to
see.
Why don't you get it, and you can control it and do what you want with it.
Okay. Now I said that and watch me not have it. Oh, here it is. I knew I had it up. Okay. So I'm gonna take you and put you over there.
I actually have a quick question before we move on. Maybe it's a very fundamental problem, but I feel like I know nothing about those critical theory. I feel really ashamed. But when we're talking about post-colonialism, I feel like there is a word like post, but is it about time that like the colonialism is about acquiring the lands, the actual resources, and post means after that period. So like we've already moved over that period. I mean, colonialism is still happening. And what does the post mean?
That is a great question. And there's an entire article about the post and post-colonialism by Kavori, and I believe it was in Critical Media and Cultural Studies, and I'll find it for you and send it to you, but I can kind of explain it. So the post and post-colonialism doesn't necessarily mean after colonialism, it means new ways of colonialism. That's the way I interpret it, although there are debates. So traditional colonialism is people get in a ship, they sail over to your country, they have better weapons than you, they kill off some people and take your stuff and install a new government, install a new way of belief, religion, ideological systems, dress, everything, the whole nine, right? That's colonialism. Post-colonialism, in my opinion, is different mechanisms that don't necessarily rely on war, that don't and are largely executed through financial arrangements like the IMF, reorganization of debt after World War II, reorganization of technology, privatization of previously state-owned properties in developing nations. And so the post can be understood as an array of different arrangements that are primarily economically and ideologically based that allow dominant powers to remain dominant without overt military action. That's what I would describe. But
those phenomena are operating alongside. So we have a colonialism and we have post-colonialism at the same time.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Right.
The seduction and co-option of people is a big part of that, where they don't even realize they're part of what's being done to them.
Absolutely. It works best when they don't, when they just go ahead and repeat it. Then whoever the colonizer is, then you don't have to show your military might. That's exactly right. Okay, so we're going to watch a wonderfully disturbing video. All right. Let me share again. I always show this to my undergrad PR students, and they're like, no, say it isn't so.
Not ever for days.
Okay, can y'all see that?
One of Bernays' main clients was the giant United Fruit Company. They own vast banana plantations in Guatemala in Central America. For decades, United Fruit had controlled the country through pliable dictators. It was known as a banana republic. But in 1950, a young officer, Colonel Arbenz, was elected president. He promised to remove United Fruit's control over the country. And in 1953, he announced the government would take over much of their land. It was a massively popular move, but a disaster for United Fruit, and they turned to Bernays to help get rid of Arbenz.
United Fruit brings in Bernays, and he basically understood that what United Fruit Company had to do was change this from being a popularly elected government that was doing some things that were good for the people there into this being very close to the American shore, a threat to American democracy, that it being at a time in the Cold War when Americans responded to issues of the Red Scare and what communism might do. He was trying to transform this and brilliantly did transform it into an issue of a communist threat very close to our shores, taking United Fruit again as a commercial client out of the picture and making it look like a question of American democracy, American values being threatened.
In reality, Arbenz was a democratic socialist with no links to Moscow. But Bernays set out to turn him into a communist threat to America. He organized a trip to Guatemala for influential American journalists. Few of them knew anything about the country or its politics. Bernays arranged for them to be entertained and to meet selected Guatemalan politicians who told them that Arbenz was a communist controlled by Moscow. During the trip, there was also a violent anti-American demonstration in the capital. Many of those who worked for United Fruit were convinced it had been organized by Bernays himself. He also created a fake independent news agency in America called the Middle American Information Bureau. It bombarded the American media with press releases saying that Moscow was planning to use Guatemala as a beachhead to attack America. All of this had the desired effect.
In Guatemala, the Jacob Arbenz regime became increasingly communistic after its inauguration in 1951. Communists in the Congress and high governmental positions controlled major committees, labor and farm groups, and propaganda facilities. They agitated and led in demonstrations against neighboring countries and the United States.
What was profoundly new in terms of what Bernays did is he took this menace to our backyard in Guatemala. For the first time, we saw Reds a couple hundred miles from New Orleans, who Eddie Bernays had us believing were a true threat to us, that it was going to be a Soviet outpost in our backyard.
But what Bernays was doing was not just trying to blacken the Arbenz regime. He was part of a secret plot. President Eisenhower had agreed that America should topple the Arbenz government, but secretly. The CIA were instructed to organize a coup. Working with the United Fruit Company, the CIA trained and armed a rebel army and found a new leader for the country called Colonel Armas. The CIA agent in charge was Howard Hunt, later one of the Watergate burglars.
What we wanted to do was have a terror campaign to terrify Arbenz, particularly, terrify his troops, much as the German Stuka bombers terrified the population of Holland, Belgium, and Poland at the onset of World War II, and just rendered everybody paralyzed.
As planes flown by CIA pilots dropped bombs on Guatemala City, Edward Bernays carried on his propaganda campaign in the American press. He was preparing the American population to see this as the liberation of Guatemala by freedom fighters for democracy.
He totally understood that the coup would happen when the public and the press, when conditions in the public and the press allowed for a coup to happen, and he created those conditions. He was totally savvy in terms of just what he was helping create there in terms of its overthrow. But ultimately, he was reshaping reality, reshaping public opinion in a way that's undemocratic and manipulative.
On June 27, 1954, Colonel Arbenz fled the country, and Armas arrived as the new leader. Within months, Vice President Nixon visited Guatemala. In an event staged by United Fruit's PR department, he was shown piles of Marxist literature that had been found, it was said, in the presidential palace.
This is the first time in the history of the world that the communist government has been overthrown by the people. And for that, we congratulate you and the people of Guatemala for the support they have given. And we are sure that under your leadership, supported by the people whom I have met by the hundreds on my visit to Guatemala, that Guatemala is going to enter a new era in which there will be prosperity for the people together with liberty for the people. Thank you very much for allowing us to see this exhibit of communism in Guatemala.
You're welcome. And for dinner, see what Mother has for dessert. Banana gingerbread shortcake. Just another of the many tempting ways in which this nutritious fruit can be prepared. So now that you've seen where bananas come from before they reach your table, our journey to Banana Land is ended. We hope you enjoyed the trip. We know you like bananas.
Bernays had manipulated the American people, but he had done so because he, like many others at the time, believed that the interests of business and the interests of America were indivisible, especially when faced with the threat of communism. But Bernays was convinced that to explain this rationally to the American people was impossible, because they were not rational. Instead, one had to touch on their inner fears and manipulate them in the interests of a higher truth. He called it the engineering of consent.
He was doing it for the American way of life, and to which he was devoted. So this sincerely devoted, and yet he felt the people were really pretty stupid. And that's the paradox. If you don't leave it up to the people themselves, but force them to choose what you want them to choose, however subtly, then it's not democracy anymore. It's something else. It's being told what to do. It's that old authoritarian thing.
But the idea that it was necessary to manipulate the inner feelings of the American population in the interests of fighting the Cold War now began to take root in Washington. Above all, in the CIA, who were going to take it much further. They were concerned that the Soviets were experimenting with psychological methods to actually alter the memories and feelings of people, the aim being to produce more controllable citizens. It was known as brainwashing. Psychologists in the CIA were convinced that this really might be possible, and that they should try to do it themselves.
The image of the human being that was being built up at that particular time was that there was a great deal of vulnerability in every human being, and that vulnerability could be manipulated to program somebody to be something that I wanted them to be, and they didn't want to be. That you could manipulate people in such a way that they could be automatons, if you will, for whatever your own purposes were. This was the image that people thought was possible.
In the late 50s, the CIA poured millions of dollars into the psychology departments of universities across America. They were secretly funding experiments on how to alter and control the inner drives of human beings. The most notorious of these experiments was run by the head of the American Psychiatric.
Okay, we can stop there. All right. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. Oh, oops. I always put up the presentation before I share the screen. Sorry about that. All right. All right. So we saw the video now, so I have a few questions for everybody. Was that public relations? If so, why? And if not, why not?
I'll dare to go into this because I do love the topic of Bernays, because I like topics of power and influence, and I find it fascinating that the very foundations of this profession are so problematic. Because Bernays, of course, worked for President Woodrow Wilson's propaganda committee during World War I. So PR was literally born out of propaganda to convince US citizens to go and kill Germans. And he thought, well, if we could do this, why can't we use it to sell soap and all the rest of that? So I think there's a continuum here, and I know Michael Kent and Maureen Taylor have talked about this continuum in some of their work, where at one level you do have the hardcore mind-washing, brainwashing propaganda that you saw in the Third Reich, and then as you gradually move across this continuum, you get to more respectful but two-way forms of communication that potentially seeks to orientate businesses, organizations, and governments to genuine concerns of their citizens, those listening aspects as well. So I know some colleagues don't consider that PR from a normative definition. If you're going to have a normative definition saying what is PR, but I think it's certainly part of the dark arts and the history of public relations.
Okay.
Yeah, the profession is transforming, is developing. You know, when it was started in 100 years ago, when Ivy Lee brought the journalists to this crash of Pennsylvania Railroad, and to actually not to fool them, but just to show them what they wanted to show them. Yes. So, but then I mean, our colleagues understood that it doesn't work like this, and they started to develop ethical approaches. If you remember, in 60s, it was even I don't know how in America, but I remember that in Europe it was even prohibited for public relations professionals to discuss the possibility of evaluation of PR impact. But now it is impossible to come somewhere and say I'm PR professional. My performance can't be evaluated. Yes. So the ethical dilemma is developing as well. So we are putting more questions, and that's logical. It's logical that we have this discussion in 2020, and maybe our former colleagues in 1950s, they didn't have such discussions.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
May I also chip in a little bit? I just want to say that I think that we have two definitions of public relations, one from the practical point of view and one from the scientific point of view. And what's emphasized pretty much everywhere is the practical point of view. And because the practice have tried for so long to distance themselves from the propaganda point of view, that's why they define it as mutually beneficial, and everything that's bad and not for the people is not public relations. But from the scientific point of view, it's totally public relations, because if you define it as strategic communication on behalf of organizations, publics, and groups, you know, how Edwards was defining it, or how Dozier was defining it, you know, trying to distance from the practical point of view, then it's totally public relations. And then it also opens up so many opportunities for us to study, rather than focusing on only what's good. We can really study, you know, broader, and seeing what's bad, and, you know, how it's affecting and what effects it has.
But that reduction of public relations to just things you do, I mean, we can do that with rhetoric, and we can say rhetoric is just a tool, and rhetoric can be used for good or bad. And then, so arguably, okay, we have to turn to organizational communication to be ethical, but it's the same thing. There's nothing that says you can't, because when you were doing the definitions, I was going to throw in management council, because I think that's a key thing. You can still be in charge, you can still see public relations strategically, and you could still see it as, you know, serving a management function, but you could also be expected to make ethical decisions and guide the organization on a path to do what's right. So I think that, I don't know if it's that cut and dried. I think there's a little more fuzziness to it.
Yeah.
I think public relations faces an image problem in developing countries. Public relations, I mean, I was a practitioner for several years, and public relations professionals are never consulted for serious social issues. They are considered as, you know, image management professionals. So, so yeah, I mean, this definition, I mean, it is true as far as public relations practice is concerned. But I think the definition has changed a lot in public relations scholarship, and we need to find ways of, you know, educating people, or you know, coming up with some interesting ideas to use public relations responsibly in you know, in community situations, in that social development space. So that's a huge area, and a lot needs to be done in that space.
I also want to chip in and say, is it because that, at least for the scholarly research, we are since 1980s, now 1990s, we're really focusing on relationship, that the relationship will be a like huge concept in public relations. But before then, and also most of what PR agencies do, they are still focusing on the management part, just the persuasion, and focusing on the psychology or like strategic persuasion, things like that. And that's also kind of a disconnection between the scholarly research and the practice. As for we are focusing on things between entities like relationship, but the practice is mostly focusing on what one entity does.
Can I add something too? So I would say that almost every profession, whether it's law, human resources, marketing, we might even go as far as to say science, has had its periods of time where people have made really bad decisions that affected others. So public relations isn't alone in its Ivy Lees and its Edward Bernays and all these other things that have happened. I would actually argue that we use that past to talk about how far and how different the field has come. Because if we call what we use as modern public relations, which has relationships, communication, negotiating meaning, all of those things, then what they did was not that. And I think we call it, as educators, we call it and we say, when we think about the history of public relations, we think of these things. Well, just because somebody used persuasion for ill does not mean it was public relations. So in some ways, it's up to us to say and call out that this is not what public relations is. You can call it early stages of public relations, but it isn't what we do now. So we control that. When we teach and we write, we can argue against that history and not have it pushed on us, because journalism, law, marketing, HR, right, all those practices also had a pretty shady past.
I like to tell my students that public relations is like a gun. You can take a gun and kill children in your area, or you can take a gun and go to defend your motherland. So that's like a tool. Mm-hmm. And it depends on, so ethics is inside the specific practitioner. Ethics is not in the profession. So you should have ethics inside yourself.
Absolutely. And I think the point of history is to learn from it, right? We don't necessarily have to wear our history on our future. We need to be aware of our history so that we can build a better future. I think that is a lesson that PR has to adopt. We're either running from Bernays, ashamed of Bernays, or different kinds of people. I think the point is to be aware of our history so we can learn from it, right? And move forward. And I also want to go back to something that Michael said about public relations being a strategic counsel. So I want to, and Michael, correct me if I am mischaracterizing what you were trying to say. I gathered from it that you were saying that it's not that serving management is bad. It's how you serve management that's good or bad, right? And what you as a PR counsel provide to management to help shape their decisions. Is that the distinction you were making?
Yeah, I mean, we have a responsibility to look to the future and to see what trends are happening, and to try to guide the organization to avoid making bad decisions. And then, of course, we have the choice to whether to do it. We can resign, we can quit if we had to, but ultimately we try to guide them on the right path. And then if we're successful, then we're not engaging in something that leads to harm onto others, but we are still serving the organization's interests.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right. So I have another question. Oops. My question didn't want to come up. PowerPoint, technology, rebelling. Oh, it did come up. Was that post-colonialism? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
This is a very good question, by the way, if to think deeply. From one side, it's post-colonialism. From other side, it's not. It's colonialism. And
okay.
there are several features to support both variants. Post-colonialism, because as did I understood your point that it is post-colonialism because the benefits from it actually was taken not by the nation United States, but by the specific company, specific group of people. So actually the benefits were not taken to the people of America, but to the very, very narrow group of people. But from other side, yes, they involve the all resources of this country, even the military force.
Absolutely. All right, other thoughts? Other thoughts?
I think he captured it.
Okay, we'll move it right along. Thank you very much. Okay.
Maybe that, sorry, maybe that, I mean, it is a difficult question, but I was just thinking that, it's interesting to know the story, like what happened afterwards. Did it had a profound impact on the people? You see, I don't know the Guatemala story very well. So I don't know what effect all of this had on the people afterwards. Did they become less, I mean, what happened to them? Did they change their values, or did they change their view? Did they change the political beliefs? I don't know, just so interesting.
That's a good question. And the only thing I know that I could say to that is that they're still developing. You know what I mean? So had their future been able to be self-determined, who knows? Doesn't appear that it was, and to this day, they're still a developing nation. Can that all be laid at the foot of United Fruit and Edward Bernays? Don't know, probably not. But my guess is that the effects were not universally beneficial to the people of Guatemala. That's just my hunch, but it's a good point.
Can I ask, while we're on this definition of post-colonialism, I've just been watching The Crown on Netflix and I've been thoroughly enjoying it. And it's got the episodes with Margaret Thatcher in it are really great. And I remember Thatcher famously said that she doesn't believe in intergenerational guilt. And that was a core part of her thesis, sort of rejecting the whole post-colonial project. And she also said things like, there's no such thing as society, we're just all individuals, and that type of stuff. But I was wondering, how would you respond to that position from Thatcher that, we don't need to believe in intergenerational guilt? What would a post-colonial perspective, how would it respond and challenge that?
That's a colonial, though, isn't it?
You said that again? I missed it, Michael.
I said that's a colonial view, though. That just like abdication of responsibility. You can't blame me for this. That's just a cop out anyway.
Yeah, I would have said pretty much the same thing and say if I was her, I'd say that too, and then I'd hire Edward Bernays. All right, but no, that's an excellent question. Okay, one more. What's the relationship, or the relationships, really, could be more than one, between public relations and post-colonialism?
This is very convenient.
Based on the movie or beyond.
It's the topic of your report. This is very convenient that we expect that you will tell us what is the relationship.
Oh, you want me to tell you?
Well, we expected this.
Okay. Okay. Well, absolutely. So I do like the discussion, but I'm happy to say, so I think one of the ways that we can view the relationship between post-colonialism and public relations is as mutually conducive, though beneficial asymmetrically. What I mean by that is that public relations has had a tendency to serve dominant powers to either increase, enhance, or reproduce their powers in relations to marginalized groups and people. We saw that in the video, but we can see that in many cases throughout society. And y'all are about to get a treat because I have a 3-year-old who's supposed to be upstairs right now. Hi, baby. Sorry, it's that she's supposed. Okay, show it to me. Thank you, baby. You want to say hi? Say hi and then go, and then mommy will give you more chocolate. Say hi. 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 I'm so sorry, you guys. No childcare Thanksgiving. And I don't know what my husband's doing. Marky, he's supposed to be entertaining her. But okay, so I was in the middle of trying to explain the relationship between post-colonialism. Okay, good, I'm feeling better. I was like praying that this would not occur, but you know, these things happen. All right, staying focused. So I would say that the relationship between public relations and post-colonialism is one that's mutually constitutive. In that public, thank you, baby. In that public relations is often used to support relations of domination. However, we shouldn't universally understand it that way, because I think public relations can also be used to transform relations of domination within post-colonial context when there is attention to those subaltern voices that Spivak was talking about. So traditionally, we would think of a post-colonial critique of public relations in terms of that video that we just saw Bernays, and say, look how look how public relations is used to help the rich get richer, and that's why PR is bad. That's one part of the story, but it's not the whole part of the story. And we can also think of post-colonialism as an intervention into public relations to help the field in terms of practitioners and scholarships get towards that greater good. Start to think about how mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and publics can privilege the publics at certain times. That's how I would describe it. Did that help? Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry if there was a little stream of consciousness. I was trying to focus, but.
It did, it helped me, but I come back to those contingency theorists guys from the United States from the early noughties, and they say, but you know, if management says no, how far can your activism go? You know what I mean? And I suppose, what's your advice? Well, how do we deal with that as professionals? I just encourage my own students to leak to journalists, for instance, to do, you know, be whistleblowers essentially. But yeah.
No, in that I'll go to my professional experience as a PR person. And one of the things I think, and this is just my own, thoughts here. One of the things that I've seen is that PR people, sometimes we're insecure. We're insecure about our place in the academy. We're insecure about our place in the corporation. But one of the things that we have to do is be confident in our knowledge. And back to what Michael was saying about being a counselor, being able to say, like, no, sometimes it's lonely by yourself. And I'll give a quick story here. So back when I was working, and it's like, I don't consider this work. Like, I enjoy, academia. I enjoyed corporate America too, but in a different way. But this to me is not work. But back in my professional life, and I was like a newly promoted manager, but I was reporting to the president of the company and on the executive team. And it was myself in a meeting with the president and the vice president of sales, we had just acquired a company that was underperforming. One of the managers was not living up to his, or no, I'm sorry, one of the vice presidents of the newly acquired company was not living up to his responsibilities. But we just acquired a company. And if anyone knows anything about acquiring companies or stuff like that, trust is not always there. And you spend a ton of money in public relations trying to build trust with those who you've acquired, unless they're happy to be acquired. These people were not necessarily thrilled. So we had spent months building good relationships with this company, having parties, having cookies and open talk, and, you know, doing all the PR things, news releases and personal notes from the president and all kinds of stuff. And so we're in this meeting, just the three of us, and this vice president of the newly acquired company is just underperforming and also not being honest. And the senior vice president of sales said, I think we just need to go in there and we need to just fire him on the spot, and that'll get everyone's attention and get their asses in line. And that's what we need to do. And I didn't say anything. I'm new, you know? And so my boss, who was the president, said to me, well, Nika, what do you think? And I said, well, I'm the newest person to the team and I'm the youngest person on the team. But my thought is that we just spent all this time and money trying to build trust. I don't think we should do that. I think that will make you look schizophrenic and erratic. And I think that you should wait a little bit longer. And then if you want to get rid of this person, do it in a much more strategic and purposeful, intentional manner. So it doesn't look like a knee-jerk reaction, and it doesn't look like everything you promised everyone in terms of the type of values our company has is a lie. Thought I did pretty good. So the president looked at the senior vice president and said, well, what do you think about what she said? He said, I agree with Nika that you're the youngest, newest person here and you know the least. And I said, okay, but I stood, enough said, but I stood my ground. And I said, that's my belief and you all are free to do what you want, but this is my counsel to you. So what I think PR people need to be doing from a personal and professional and academic standpoint is speak up, right? Sometimes, and I had a good understanding boss though, and he didn't fire me, but sometimes that's the risk we have to run. I always say and believe you've got to do what you think is the right thing. And I learned and was trained by PR people who trained me that way. So I believe that. But I also have worked with a lot of PR people who don't believe that, won't do it. And there you have it. So to answer your question, I think we as PR people need to have confidence in what we study as scholars, what we practice as professionals, and then stand our ground, and let the chips fall where they may.
That's extremely important issue you raised, because the profession developed very powerful instruments, very powerful tools. And those tools, which if some unethical person uses tools, he can or she can do a lot of harm to people in corporate sector, in politics, in economics, in culture, by the way, as well. So this is very important for communication people to understand that they are interpreters not only of message from its own organization to the public, but vice versa. He should or she should deliver the message from the public to the head of organization, and to explain him or her that how public will understand his deeds, and that his deeds might crush, for example, like country or community, and that's this enormous dilemma, especially in such countries like we have, because for example, you in America, you have at least good professional organizations. They at least do something, but we don't have it, and we universities are trying to somehow to put the standards ahead and at least to prepare the young professionals who will enter the market and with some standards, but it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, we have to teach our students to be brave, right? And I'll say one other thing why public relations, at least I found it lonely in corporate settings, is because, okay, so you're sitting around the table, you're sitting there with legal, you're sitting there with HR, you're sitting there with marketing, you're sitting there with sales. All of them make money. We spend money. And so for some reason, because of that dichotomy or that setup, that arrangement, it's almost like sometimes what we do isn't seen immediately as valuable. But if I save your reputation, if I save a lawsuit, if I save something else, it's not going to be the same thing as this guy who brought in a big account. But that's why we've got to be confident in the value we bring ourselves. And we got to teach our students to do the same.
I was also wondering whether it was possible to understand organizations differently, whether social networks or NGOs are understood in a different way than corporations. Then the way you approach PR will completely change.
Absolutely. I spent my career in corporate settings. So yeah, I'm very curious. I have friends who've worked for nonprofits, but yeah, I think your experience in PR and the objectives will definitely be shaped by the organization in which you're working and its objectives. All right, great discussion. Okay, so Dutta talked about this thing called communicative inversions. Do y'all remember what those are? Okay, there's going to be a pop quiz. No, just kidding. The answer. Communicative inversions refer to the uses of communication to shift symbolic representations to signify the opposite of the material formation that communication seeks to represent. Inversions are thus communicative turns that shift material representations, dislocating them from their underlying structural configurations. So I think we'll all agree on the answer to this one. Did Bernays and United Fruit engage in communicative inversions? If so, how? And if not, why not?
Look, I'll confess, as a busy dad, I didn't get a chance to do all of the readings. I am familiar with your work from my course that I said, but I'll have a crack here. So inversions are thus communicative turns that shift material representations. So I think you're talking there about masking. I think it's a Marxist point. I think this is neo-Marxism, and the point is that the means of production, including alienation and the true social costs of production, are being masked by communication and by certain ways of presenting what's going on by those products and that sort of stuff. So I'm assuming Bernays would not want to expose the true nature of that commodity and the production cycle and chain. So I would say the answer is no. And why would he not want to do that? Well, you don't really want to, you don't want to make people, I guess, feel uncomfortable about this sort of stuff. I suppose they want the opposite, to manufacture false consciousness.
Yeah, and I had not honestly thought about it that way, and I think that's good. As many perspectives as we can bring to the table, I think, to really dig into it, and then we'll move on to some other examples. I think it's good. The way I understood it is that communicative inversions are representations that misrepresent, are symbolic representations that misrepresent material conditions. So the news releases that he put out, about the event, the press junket that he had, in which there's a riot here. So symbolically, it looks like there's a communist coup going on in the backyard of America and Guatemala. But materially, that's not what's going on at all. Materially, what's occurring is this effort to materially what's occurring is this effort to maintain an economic dominant position over the banana producers in Guatemala. But that was my interpretation.
Thank you. I liked how you were very diplomatic in how you corrected me. So,
well, no, I could be, you know, I think what we're all doing here, and one of the reasons why I love being a scholar is that we're all playing with ideas, and so many things are not written in stone. So absolutely not. I wouldn't call it a correction at all. I call your contribution an appreciated addition to the discussion. So thank you. We're just discussing. And so I'll move on to say, historically, public relations as a practice of communication connected to processes of image making and propaganda played a key role in achieving these communicative inversions. During World War II, achieving consensus and orchestrating public opinion, right? So here's another question. Are communicative inversions a necessary part of PR? Why or why not? Because I think we can agree, you know, either through Mitchell's interpretation or my own, there's some relationship between communicative inversions and public relations, but is it necessary?
That's a very hard question, but I love the discussion as well. I would say that, you know, it's an interesting thing if we think about what forms the future. From one point of view, we should report what is truth, what is out there, based on objective, the truth, based on the materialistic, you know, what is.
Right.
From another point of view, we can visualize what's happening. So we can build a story, which probably is not there yet, but we kind of can move forward. And it's good when it's in a positive way, right? It's bad when it's in a negative way. But who decides what's positive and negative in the end? But I mean, so this is kind of the question, right? Like, should we tell what's not there yet, but where we're striving to be? Or should we strictly say what is out there? So I don't have an answer to this question. I think it depends on the situation. I think it's very contextual, and it really depends who you are and what you're doing, and also which industry you're working on, right? Because raising expectations or, you know, building the stories is different in different industries. Health communication is, you know, is different than risk communication or than corporate communication. So I don't know, but that's my chip here.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's an interesting thing to consider. And I actually don't know the answer to this question. That's why I was curious to see what you guys think. Are there other thoughts? Are they necessary?
Well, I think there's also two things here. I got to go back to the Dutta piece. I didn't have time. We had a guy show up to go through our house, but this is a Burkean concept in many ways of casuistic stretching, and casuistic stretching is used sort of inherently unethically in most cases, where we try to, you know, create a new meaning from an old meaning and stretch the truth. But at the same time, this definition and this question ignores that so many PR people aren't in the job of shaping people's external perceptions. We've got internal public relations, and there's an argument to be made that activists are actually doing this. They're inverting how people see the world in a perfectly ethical way, because they're sort of revealing the truth to people who are deluded, who are, you know, not seeing things in the sense of other people in the world, but selfishly. So I think there's some, you know, argument to be made that this isn't inherently a bad thing, but in many ways, depends who's using it, it is a bad thing.
Absolutely. Back to the example of the gun from earlier. And I can't see everybody's names when I'm in presenting mode. Yes, baby. Okay. Give her the
word necessary to possible.
Nana.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. Would you repeat that, please?
Yeah, I would replace the word necessary part to possible part of PR.
I think that's a great point.
It's necessary is too strong for myself.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Thank you. All right. So, all right. The last concept we'll kind of deal with related to post-colonialism before we wrap up is bio-capitalism. which is defined as a new phase of capitalism linking life forms to information capitalism, finding new spaces of wealth extraction through the piracy of subaltern knowledge, thought, I think it's thought patenting of life as private commodity, and through the large-scale global marketing of such knowledge as scientific, technical solutions of development and well-being. And the part I want to focus on is the large-scale global marketing of knowledge as scientific, technical solutions of development and well-being. And I wanted, and this may not apply at all, but I thought it could, and I thought it'd be an interesting point of discussion. Are you guys aware of Qantas's new policy regarding vaccines? Are you guys, okay. Does somebody want to share with us what that is?
Yeah, so Qantas aren't going to let you fly unless you've been immunized against COVID. Yeah.
Is this an example of bio-capitalism, or can it be understood in that way? Or is it merely the public good?
I'd say the public good, but see, Australia and Australians, I guess, we've sort of taken a very different approach to COVID, and we've sort of complied with, I guess, infringements on personal liberties and whatnot in a way that places like America and Europe haven't. So from my perspective, it's serving the public good, but others, I guess, anti-vaxxers would see it as some sort of gross abuse of their human rights. But I just sort of say, hold them down and stick the needle in them.
Well, as a new Australian, so Michael moved here about 3 years ago, and I moved here about 1.5 years ago. It's actually been a really interesting observation to see how Australia deals with the individualist, the relationship between government and the people. And so it actually is a very, if Russia had done it, we would have been all over it, right? The world would have been like, oh my God, that's the worst thing in the world. You're infringing on people's human rights. But somehow Australia gets away with it. And there'll be criticism, and they've, it's a trial balloon right now, and everyone's reacting to it. But it seems uniquely Australian to me.
Interesting.
May I also chip in a little bit here in this discussion? And I have not read this paper, so this chapter, I think it was a chapter. I'm not sure if my comment is more about capitalism versus human rights and public good, but a lot of what I'm seeing, and I think I'm in that sense a little bit blessed being friends and know people from very different backgrounds, from very different political views, from very different situations in life, just from where I live, where I study, with whom I talk, and kind of like from the context. I see a lot of this discussion about COVID and specifically, but like in general, from a very privileged point of view, because many people, they don't have an opportunity to stay at home, or right, because they have to work, because and where they work, very low paid jobs, and so a lot of this discussion is really so much privilege in a sense, that there's no much understanding of what and why people are mad at all these restrictions, and why people do not want to go through this, and why people, and the masks, masks cost money. So when you have 5 people in the family, that's also very expensive. So I would say the bio-capital, it depends on where you're from. It depends on the resources you have as a government, as a society. Because if you have to pay for that vaccine, and you have to go somewhere 100 miles, and you have to find time, that's definitely bio-capitalism. But if you're given everything to be able to take this vaccine, then and you decide not to, then it's another story. So I just think we need to think a little bit more in terms of the context in which people are located or live in, then we can mark it as either or.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. it depends on the standpoint from which one is engaging in this process at all before a determination of biocapitalism can even be made. Excellent point. Okay, let's move on. And I just skipped the last slide, and I didn't realize how much time had gone by in the discussion. So I'm going to try to speed us along. This has been great. I had a lot of questions because I didn't know, how many, responses I'd get and how much discussion we've had, but this has been great. But are there any takeaways before we leave the subject of post-colonialism? Okay, if you think about some, we can come back to it. Oh.
I would just add that, when we started having this discussion, I was thinking I need to add more specific content about this to my lecture. I know I talk about many of these issues sort of in different parts, but this is one of those things like ethics, where I'm teaching a class for somebody else this semester, and the last lecture was on ethics. I'm like, really? It's the last lecture. It should have been the first lecture. And I really struggled to try to put ethics first or second lecture up front in my classes. And this is another one of those topics that we actually need to spend.
Absolutely.
One of my takeaways is going to be that I'm definitely going to add that Guatemala video to the class if when I'm teaching principles or something like this, because that's wonderful. That's perfect. That's just very interesting. Thanks for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome. Students love that. Students love that. All right. So we're going to move along. What does this image make you think of when you see it? In the interest of time, I was hoping the answer would be globalization. So I'll ask what, and you can see now even some linkages, right, between post-colonialism, globalization. They're all part of the same, process in a way, though differently articulated. But what are some of the ways in which you understand globalization?
Exchange of goods, but also production of goods. One thing can be produced in so many different countries. Exchange of cultures, integration and hybridity of cultures, if there is a word like this, hybrid cultures, and kind of how they merge, how they become together.
Absolutely. Oh, were you saying something like?
Oh yeah, it's also the movement. Sorry.
I was just saying, use a real word.
And also multicultural.
Maybe looking for resources at a global level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All of you guys are touching on exactly what globalization is: movement of people, movement of ideas, movement of currency, movement of culture, movement of resources, movement of money, right? All of these things are, and if not death of the nation state, certainly nation state on life support, right? It might need a ventilator, or maybe not, who knows? Maybe the corporations will fix all our problems. But every now and then I like to include a non-academic source in something. And so I really like this definition from the National Geographic Encyclopedia, but it is essentially the same as from the reading. Globalization, and also as what you guys all said, globalization can be defined as the process of intensification of cross-area, cross-border social relations between actors from very distant locations, and of growing transnational interdependence of economic and social activity. And there's many reasons for globalization, right? Well, there are, if I can turn the slide. And Mitchell touched on several, but the state's enforcement of power is bound to its territory, while the subjects of state regulation, especially business firms, have massively expanded their activity beyond national borders. So while the state remains constrained, the business firm's power is unleashed in unprecedented ways. There's new social and environmental challenges which are transnational in scope and cannot be regulated or governed unilaterally. So some examples of these problems are things like climate change or global warming. And then we can think about the implications of corporations. And to me, Amazon and Patagonia are fascinating. First of all, they're fascinating to me because of their commitment to climate change, but the drastically different ways they approach it. So Amazon recently, like, I don't know how many people saw in the news, this was like, I think maybe February, a bunch of employees concerned about Amazon's impact on the environment. Okay, y'all are nodding like you saw this, had band together and like, you need to change your environmental practices, Amazon. And they held a news conference, they put out a press release. And y'all remember how Amazon responded? Yeah. Were they like, thanks so much for this great information? What were you saying, Michael? I missed it.
I said Jeff Bezos tried to have them all killed.
Almost, but he did send them a note or had HR send a note saying that speaking about Amazon or any of its assets was against company policy and would not be tolerated. All right. But then, interestingly enough, a couple months later, Amazon made a massive donation to combat climate change. Anybody remember how much? 10 billion. Yeah, something like $10 billion, right? So I care about climate change as a corporation donating $10 billion, but you better not talk about it, employees. You know, who knows, these things are complicated. On the opposite end, we have just a company that makes you want to do those heart hands, right? Patagonia, longstanding commitment to the environment. They put out statements, they put out videos about climate change well before it was popular, partnered with NGOs, really tried to make substantive change in this area. And it's just a great example to me of how corporations and corporate America in general is trying to confront this existential crisis of climate change in two dramatically, maybe traumatically, if you were one of those Amazon employees that got threatened, but two dramatically different ways, right? Another example of a social problem that is global in nature, unable to be solved by any one nation, despite what some may think, is COVID. And I think Maureen gave a very brilliant analysis of the relationship between COVID-19 and the inadequacy of neoliberalism to address this global problem, right? We need solutions that are capable of managing global problems. And from the perspective of the business firm, from the corporation, they're individually trying to manage it, which doesn't lend well, really, for something of this magnitude, right? There needs to be some level of coordinated effort, which makes, there needs to be something of a coordinated effort, and without it, trying to manage a global problem, a problem on a global scale with a localized approach simply doesn't work. And another example of globalized problems that are unable to be managed by one nation state, let alone the declining status of nation states, is war. So these are just some of the examples of problems of globalization that require globalized solutions that we've yet to see. Some additional reasons for globalization are that new actors and institutions such as international organizations, NGOs, for example, and civil society groups are gaining in political influence. And their activities are not limited to a certain territory. Their influence stems from the political power they can exert inside and outside of traditional institutions of nation state politics, for example, by lobbying, by public relations. See, we're at the center of everything. Campaign, knowledge, and competence, offering material and symbolic support, or threatening with divestments or a retreat of resources. As a result, we observe new forms of government below, above, and beyond the nation state, as Mitchell touched on earlier. And this has taken us to a place where we exist in a world that is governed by a post-national constellation of forces. Globalization is weakening the power of national political authorities to regulate the activities of corporations that globally expand their operations. And the authors argue, Scherer and Palazzo, that it has two negative effects: the race to the bottom and the regulatory vacuum effect. So the race to the bottom, are y'all familiar with that? What that is? And if not, you can see it right there. What it basically means is that multinational corporations can split their operations and shift them to those regions that promise optimum contribution to profit maximization. They can decide to produce in a country with low wages and weak unions and pay taxes in offshore countries. This is where, jobs have gone, factories have gone. And as a result, national governments may be forced into a race to the bottom in order to win the competition to attract more corporate investments against other countries. So I have a question. And I don't know if you guys have seen The Factory, the movie. Have y'all saw that? All right. So Anna's like feeling it. So tell me, share. So my question,
when I was watching it, I was in awe and I was so mad. I mean, I was so happy that you made us watch it, because I couldn't believe when I was watching it, and I couldn't believe it when I was watching for several reasons. First, how in the world they were able to shot it, to capture, and how people were so open and transparent in what they were saying. And then the second part, from the communications point of view, I just couldn't believe that they communicate and they completely don't understand each other. Like, there's not even a bit of understanding of each other. Well, for those who didn't watch, basically the Fuyao, they came to Dayton, Ohio, to establish a factory on a closed GM factory where they started building glass. So, and the movie is about Chinese culture. It's actually not Chinese culture. It's more about clash of the cultures, clash of some just miscommunication along the way, clash of the values. Very interesting. Thank you so much for making us to watch it.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. When I saw it, I was like, what in the world is this? Is this globalization? Is this reverse globalization? Is this domination by AI, which was ultimately the goal? But so Anna did a great job of explaining it, but did anyone else see it, or do people need another quick explanation? No, so basically it's a Chinese company that's come to Dayton, Ohio, took over the GM plant, and promise of great, and the area is economically depressed, which is what attracted this, what do they call it? It's an investment, but what's the word they use, like when a big company comes to town and it's like I don't know, but they're investing in the area. So my question is, if just that bit of knowledge, is Fuyao's presence in Dayton, and they've since expanded to Illinois and a couple other states in the US, is that an example, or has America now entered the race to the bottom? America, the former post-colonial, you're nodding, Michael?
Yes, I think we have.
I think, though, this is not the first time. You need to remember, many of you are young, but in the 1970s and 80s, Japan was actually the economic powerhouse. And they bought into and started factories in the United States. And everybody was worried that Japan would end up buying America. They bought American real estate. They invested in our stock market. They brought Honda and Toyota to American factories, right? So we've already had this once. And if you look at Japan today, Japan has not come out of a 20-year recession. So this is not the first time that we've had, and there's a great movie with Michael Keaton in it about an American automobile plant in probably Michigan or Illinois
where the Japanese come in and they try to create the quality circles and the exercise in the morning and all of these, their cultural practices that have made them such an economic powerhouse. So this isn't the first time it's happened.
Right, right. And I'm
speaking Japanese, right? And the Japanese economy was not able to capitalize on it and maintain it for a variety of reasons, including cross culture, but also that Japanese business practices are incredibly intransparent and narrow and nepotistic and political. And that doesn't thrive in what was a democratic, individualistic country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think one other question though, and here's how it may be different, but I'm just curious in terms of what you think and what everyone thinks in terms of the end of that movie with Fuyao. What happens at the end in the factory? Anna, you remember? What's the ultimate goal?
Well,
or does anyone?
I remember a few things that struck my mind, which were in the end. The first one was about him walking in the Buddha temple, if I'm not mistaken, and saying he doesn't know who he is, whether he is breaking the environment or breaking kind of, ruining the world, or he's contributing to building a new world. That's, the CEO, the guy. And the second thing was that they eventually they said no to the union. They voted and they said no to the union. The employees of the factory, they voted and they said no to the union. And then there is a little bit of, discussion over there, kind of, actually the ending is quite sad. Oh, yes. I remember the last moment. Actually, I got in an argument with my mom about this. Like we were almost like, not like fighting, but we were arguing about this a lot. That lots of their jobs are going to be automated in 10 years or so. And there will be like 355 or so millions of jobs that will be automated. So those people, they will lose their jobs. And I was like, my gosh, we're going to tell those people to do something now. So, yeah.
Right. So I think even that suggests another phase of post-colonialism that is not based on traditional relations of race, right? But it's technology, it's AI, it's pure economic neoliberalism as domination and subjugation of human beings that I think, bears watching. So I am going to move mightily along. And then the other thing that the authors were concerned about with the collapse of the decline of the nation state and the rise of corporate power is there's this regulatory vacuum whereby multinational corporations have all of this power. They're spreading into different areas, but there's no law, there's no international law capable of keeping up with their activities. And although, and although the US has kind of pioneered some of these laws in terms of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, Alien Tort Claims Act, Sarbanes-Oxley, that have international implications, the problem the authors see there is that it's reinforcing a US hegemony without participation from global partners. So the solution initiates another problem. So ultimately, the authors are concerned, and you see this throughout corporate social responsibility literature, that weakened governments and stronger private sector means no one is in control. But this means that corporate social responsibility or corporate responsibility has the potential to become the most important issue of our modern era. And in the interest, because Michael, how long do we have? I think I might have run long. I don't want to.
Well, so the simple answer is you can take as long as you want. People will just leave. The short answer is we run about 2 hours.
Okay.
You're fine. I mean, you're a few minutes over, but we started late.
Okay. So I'll kind of just hit the high points because I don't want to exhaust people and I want to be respectful of time. But the Scherer Palazzo chapter is just basically getting at this point that we need new solutions to the globalized world. And they propose a new paradigm for CSR that holds political solutions for societal changes are no longer limited to the political system, but have to become embedded in decentralized processes that include non-state actors such as NGOs and corporations. This new phenomenon goes beyond the mainstream understanding of corporate responsibility, which tends to be and this is me departing here, which tends to be, functionalist, instrumentalist, and value corporate social responsibility based on ROI. The authors argue, and I'm returning to their quote, that on the global playing field, corporations have to be understood as economic and political actors, not merely economic actors, right? That's an about face from the Milton Friedman school, from the traditional paradigms of CSR. We have to understand corporations as political actors and economic actors. And their work sets up a nice kind of transition into my own work, because I believe that corporations also have to be understood as racialized actors. And I'll talk a little bit about that before we wrap up. So one of the concepts I've been playing with in my recent research, and as it pertains to public relations, corporations, race, and PR, is this idea of the corporate responsibility to race. And so I'd just love to get input on it. That's why I was rushing so I can get your input. But all right, so it's a theoretical concept that holds corporations should communicate in ways that advocate for racial justice, attempt to improve race relations, and support achieving a more equitable and harmonious society. I argue that corporations have this responsibility to race because corporations have historically perpetuated and profited from racial oppression, making them contributors to and benefactors of racial injustice. These circumstances obligate corporations, in my opinion, to work towards achieving racial justice. And as a theoretical concept in development, CRR draws together PR, race, and corporate social responsibility theory. It represents a departure from traditional scholarship on race and PR that has often focused on the individual experiences of people in PR from a professional, student, or practitioner, faculty perspective. And also it's a departure from traditional or neoclassical corporate discourse on race that emphasizes ROI. So I'll share with you a few examples of what I consider traditional corporate discourse on race. Diversity management, the focus there has traditionally been incorporating racial minorities into the labor pool, which benefits minorities, but has the greater benefit for the corporation of expanding its talent pool and labor pool. Marketing, attracting multicultural consumers, function of sales, again, contributing to profit. Crisis communication, it's about image repair, that's the focus, and restoration, and of course, solving the crisis. But again, the focus in my view is on profits. Corporate social responsibility, for the most part, is dominated by business case rationale and the desire to, again, achieve ROI on those corporate social responsibility projects. And for the most part, public relations has been focused on building good relationships to create an environment that's conducive to business. Again, the impact of that discourse is profit. On the other hand, the way I've been recently thinking about the relationship between race and PR from the perspective of the corporate responsibility to race puts racial justice at the center, not necessarily profit or organizational objectives. Now, I was led into this work by other scholars who are pioneers in race and public relations and who introduced critical race theory into public relations. And so one of them is Donalyn Pomper, who wrote a famous essay back in 2005, introducing critical race theory into the field. And she said she argued it's time for critical race theory in public relations. Lee Edwards later on continued this work, and other people, I'm just hitting the highlights. And from their perspective, race is one of the most powerful ideological instrumental factors, or from Edwards' perspective, in how identity, power, and privilege is constructed or are constructed. Now, sometimes people wonder, why should a corporation have a responsibility to race? And for that, I kind of turn to critical race theory again and its emphasis on history. And if we look at critical race theory and we look at history, we understand that the relationship between race and corporations extends back to slavery. Most people, when they think of slavery, think of an image like this, right? It's agrarian, a plantation, and that's pretty much the context, at least in the US form. But industries were implicated in slavery. Can anyone tell me some of the corporate or business entities that that have a foundation or some role in benefiting from slavery? That's the way I'll say it. I could sing the Jeopardy music, but I won't. My voice is terrible. But, oh, I'm sorry. Historically, were you going to say something, Michael? Did I miss something?
Textiles.
Textiles, I should have put them on the list. Yeah, clearly textiles. Railroads, insurance companies, newspapers profited from running ads.
Universities had their buildings funded by slave owners.
Absolutely. There's an entire project of universities trying to unearth this history and surface it to the public and make good on it, right? So across the board, we can look at a variety of different industries that have literally profited, and my focus is on the corporation, but on slavery. And not just owning slaves or leasing slaves or incorporating or selling insurance policies based on slaves' lives, things like that. But there's another connection between corporations and slavery, which I argue in my work situates corporations as racialized entities. And that's this relationship between the 14th Amendment and corporate personhood. Does anybody know what that, and tobacco, yes, tobacco. Thank you, Mitchell, can't forget that. I'm in Virginia, I should know that. Thank you. But does anyone know the relationship between the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution and corporate personhood? Okay, I'll tell. It looked like somebody was about to say something. Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you. There won't be a quiz on it later. But all right. So the 14th Amendment was originally intended, at least in my reading of it and along with other scholars, Howard Graham, I forgot Graham's last name, but Howard Zinn, other noted scholars have argued that the 14th Amendment was originally intended to protect the personhood of newly freed slaves. However, it was appropriated, we'll say, by corporations who were able to successfully argue before the US Supreme Court in Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific Railroad that corporations were essentially the same as natural human beings and deserved the same rights. The Supreme Court agreed. And from that moment on, what we had was the emergence of the modern corporate form, protected by constitutional rights, which allowed corporations to amass large amounts of money and have those protected. Many people first started paying attention to this with Citizens United, which allowed almost the unfettered dissemination of corporate money into politics. And people thought that was outrageous, but didn't realize the groundwork for that was laid back with Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific Railroad. Corporate personhood is the route through which corporations have attained power and wealth, the likes of what we've seen in America today. So a question I asked in my work is, well, after the corporation became a person, what kind of person did it become within the context of race? And what we've seen time and time again is that the corporation, and these aren't the images I wanted to share, but I couldn't get the copyright in time, but I showed them to say that corporations have, I guess, reinforced the status quo of racial domination. So as a person, corporate persons have participated in processes of racial oppression and profited from them, whether it was reinforcing Jim Crow, segregation, or resisting things like affirmative action or diversity and inclusion, so on and so forth. But there's always been in this country, at the same time as there is racial oppression, there's always been resistance. And these processes continue today, of course, right? Probably exacerbated today. So today, you know, we live in a world where there was the George Floyd incident. Before that, there was the Unite the Right March in Charlottesville, Virginia. There was the Breonna Taylor incident. There was the incident in El Paso where the shooter wanted to kill as many Mexicans as possible. We have the rise of Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. And we live in a situation where racial tensions are as intense, in my opinion, as I've seen them in a long time. So a question that I ask is, what can public relations do? And that's kind of my theoretical intervention. So in 2016, I got really, really interested in what Starbucks did with their Race Together campaign. How many people remember that campaign? Y'all remember it? It was like widely panned, right? Like people were like, it's terrible. It got like slayed, and not in a good way, on social media. But what was interesting to me is that it was the first time there was proactive corporate discourse on race and an attempt to draw focus on race relations. Were you going to say something? Oh, did you have a question?
No, I raised my hand supporting. Did I see it?
Oh, okay. Sorry. And I thought, I'm gonna, oops, okay. Back. Okay. Back. All right. Here we go. Sorry about that. So yeah. Sorry about that. So yes. So it was the first time where I saw a company ask questions like, do you have friends that are different race than you? What did your parents teach you about race? Nothing about that campaign said coffee. And I think that's what some people found so offensive, because they thought, what in the world is a corporation doing talking about race? But in reality, corporations have been shaping race relations since they've, been here, and since race has been an issue. So another instance that I thought was pretty interesting and was different from the traditional ways that we see corporations discuss race was Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's actually has racial justice as a corporate value. Haven't seen that anywhere else, and has instituted a commitment in a variety of ways, whether it's enhancing voter rights, et cetera, whether it's supporting Black Lives Matter, from an authentic standpoint, from doing research on racial justice first, not just because it's a post-George Floyd environment. They too have all kinds of public relations content addressing the issue of race and injustice in the US. And then finally, AT&T is another example. The CEO, several years ago now, I think it was like 2016, gave a speech where he talked about his own experiences with race as a white man, and not really being aware of all of the issues that were going on in America, because he just simply wasn't aware. And I thought it was a really honest take on race from a mainstream standpoint. That's the way I will situate that. And so when I looked at the speech given by AT&T CEO, when I look at Ben & Jerry's discussions of racial justice and including it as a corporate value, and I look at the collateral and the PR materials from Starbucks, they all have one thing or several things in common. And that is there's a focus on race, not on profit. They acknowledge that racism is a problem. They use PR as a way to counter racism. They directly support racial justice and intend to improve race relations and society. And in doing so, I argue that they embrace a corporate responsibility to race. I'm not saying that a corporate responsibility to race should displace other forms of corporate discourse, right? I'm just saying there's room for such a perspective. And in my view, it lines up on that social good side. It could be critical, could be functionalist or instrumental, depending on how it was configured. But in my mind, it's configured on doing good for people, because racial injustice doesn't only harm those who are its victims, it harms everybody, but everybody doesn't see it equally at the same time. With that, reflections.
That was a powerful ending.
Thank you. I was trying to go fast and hit the high points. I abandoned my notes in the PowerPoint, so I apologize if any of that was unclear. I'm happy to revisit it, but I'm so appreciative of your time and want to be respectful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a great presentation. I really loved it. Thanks.
And it's been recorded, so if you want to show it to your students or listen to it or watch that movie and then come back and listen to the presentation again, you can. That's why these are sort of living documents that Michael is archiving.
And we don't have to wrap up this instant, but I would just say thank everybody for being here. This is the last for the year. We decided not to have one in December because in Australia, everybody takes from like December through January off. And plus I figured, it's a holiday for people. So we'd take it off, but we'll be getting started again in January. And, it was great to have so many people coming consistently. And I know that, people are getting a lot out of these. So we really appreciate when we get to do this every Friday at the end of the month.
Thank you. So Merry Christmas in advance.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for a great discussion. Yes, and Mitchell, thanks for keeping me honest. Coffee has been a very exploitive business throughout, or no, it was you, Michael. I got the M's confused throughout history, and Starbucks did have to contend with that.
Yeah, especially with all the fair trade issues that coffee companies are trying to, engage in now, but it was, exploitation for 100 years at least, I'm sure.
Right there next to bananas.
Yeah. All right, well, if you, take the rest of the day off, it's Friday,
Yeah.
if you're here, and if you're not here, if you're in the US, then you're going to go back and see your family and your kids and have, you didn't already have that turkey sandwich for, lunch. You can go do that now or whatever.
Exactly. Go get some leftovers.
All right, well, thank you, everybody.
Bye.
See you
Bye.
later.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now. Stop recording.